To Mathieu, Christine, and Caroline, who are interpreting our session today. Monsieur le Président, interpreters have no direct reporting relationship with MPs. They are not part of the political or parliamentary staff, but rather of core public administration. And all those MPs and their primary target audience, they have to interact with them directly, except on a few occasions when they are called upon to stand beside them and offer what we call as an elbow interpretation. Interpreters are usually isolated in their booth, and the clerk of the House of Commons Administration act as their intermediaries with the MPs. That said, MPs have direct impact on the working condition of interpreters. Through their discipline during interpreted meeting, certain basic behaviors such as respecting the rights to speak go a long way towards facilitating the work of interpreters, in addition to preventing the acoustic incident that can occur when more than one microphone is open at the same time. À ce sujet, Monsieur le Président.
On this subject, Mr. Chair, the honourable members of your committee will be aware that a number of directives, procedures, and measures have been implemented over the past few years to promote sound quality and thus protect the hearing and health of our interpreters. Interpreters, already 10 years ago, started reporting symptoms after providing simultaneous interpretation virtual and hybrid meetings. Since then, we have been steadfastly taking steps to better understand and prevent risk to interpreters with the help of the House of Commons Administration, which is responsible for providing technical support for interpretation. Drawing inspiration from the many study reports we have obtained and lessons learned from our consultations abroad, we implemented several protection measures. The Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs mentioned these measures in May 2020 and again in 2023 January reports entitled Parliamentary Duties and the COVID-19 Pandemic and Future of Hybrid Proceedings in the House of Commons. And to sum up some of these measures, there are interpretation consoles designed to protect hearing are being used. A technician is assigned to each meeting with simultaneous interpretation. Sound tests must be carried out before each meeting. Anyone speaking virtually, as we have today, is required to use an ISO microphone. Otherwise, what they say will not be interpreted.
Position of a Director of Parliamentary Affairs and Interpreter Well-Being to ensure that effectiveness and enhancement of protective measures. Over the past years, our Director have worked with the House of Commons Administration to develop protocols that formalize the prevention and management of acoustic incidents. He also drew up a continuous improvement plan under which we received this year the results of the 3 new studies, 2 on the sound transmitted and 1 on the change on the hearing of the interpreters. We look forward to receiving the expert recommendation by the end of this year. I'm happy to report, Mr. Chair, that all of these efforts are paying off. While 128 acoustic incidents were reported in 2022, 74 have been recorded in 2023. And so far this year, we only have 10. Of course, incidents still happen. Sound is a very highly complex thing that is very difficult to control perfectly, and there will always be a risk of an acoustic incident. Nevertheless, we're determined to continue our working as a team with the House administration and experts in the field to minimize the risk. Most recently, following a direction received from the Labour Program of Employment and Social Development Canada, new guidelines for handling earpiece, as mentioned this morning, have been introduced to prevent audio feedback, also known as Larsen effect. Monsieur le Président, le Bureau de la Traduction sait à quel point ces...
Mr. Chair, the Translation Bureau knows that these measures increase the complexity of our meetings, and we are grateful to your honourable colleagues for their goodwill in complying with them. We are also cognizant of the frustration that MPs can feel when, despite all of the precautions, a meeting has to be interrupted because the sound is not of sufficient quality to allow for interpretation. For somebody who has never interpreted, it can be difficult to imagine how a seemingly minor sound problem could prevent interpretation. But because interpreters have to speak while they are listening and also look, they require sound quality that is superior to that required by participants. A bit of crackling that an ordinary participant would hardly notice can cause interpreters to experience headaches and hearing problems. That is why we have instructed our interpreters to stop interpreting in the event of sound problems.
Often unpopular, even if the clerk then acts as an intermediary between the MPs and the interpreter, some MP may express dissatisfaction and the interpreter may be or feel targeted. But at the end, despite the inconvenience, one thing is clear: interpreter cannot interpret what they cannot hear. and they should never put themselves at risk by attempting to plow ahead to avoid criticism. This is why our protocol clearly stipulates that if pressure is placed on an interpreter not to interrupt the service or to resume it despite poor sound quality, they must contact the supervisor immediately, and we'll intervene to rectify the situation. That being said, so far, thanks to the great collaboration with the clerk and the committee chairs, interaction have been respectful. Il n'en demeure pas moins que l'existence d'outils comme la politique que vous avez examinée ou que vous examinez actuellement est très...
Nonetheless, tools such as the policy you're currently reviewing are very useful for defusing any conflicts that might arise in the context of parliamentary meetings where emotions can run high. Although we have never had to use it, we are grateful to the honourable members for introducing it, and we thank the committee for seeking our comments regarding its implementation. We would be happy to take your questions now. Thank you.
Excellent, mais merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I'm encouraged to hear that there has been an exceptional improvement following the implementation of the new rules. And without any doubt, the interpreters do such an important job here on our behalf. So thank you for being with us.
Enter our first round of questioning. And Mr. Duncan, I believe you would like the floor, and you will have 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here this morning. Happy 90th anniversary to the organization and your team, and thank you for the work that you do. I always say I have to make sure I talk slow. I speak Duncanese sometimes, as our family would say in Eastern Ontario, so I come to respect more often, more and more, the longer I'm here, the work that you do day in and day out. You referenced the reports that PROC has undertaken before, and I want to build off those and maybe ask some follow-up questions just to narrow down a few different things. You've alluded to this in your opening, but it is the hybrid aspect. It is that extra technology through Zoom and through meetings. That has been the overwhelming increase in workplace injuries or a lot of the anxieties that your staff face, correct?
Mr. President, absolutely. I think the period that, especially at the beginning of the pandemic, I think for all of us, only a few years ago, we had probably no clue what was MS Team or Zoom or even connecting with families and friends and also in the workplace. But also the systems were very different. So I think we've gone a long way. And now I think it's part of the behavior of most of the workplace around the world. I've heard that around 90% of the meeting everywhere now, they have at least one person who's connecting from a different location, despite it could be in town, few blocks away, or it could be at the other end of the country. But we got a lot better to understand, and the companies have also adjusted and make sure that they understand that the quality of sounds. I think you've also recognized that behaviors like when you talk without a microphone, I see more and more people using their headset. Like today, we have people online, they have their headset on. A few years ago, it was not even part of the normal practice. So absolutely, I think we got a lot better.
And with that, just looking at the stats that were in a report from March 2020 to September 2022, the Bureau received 90 incident reports. And by contrast, pre-pandemic, when virtual or remote was not an option, there was one complaint in the 5 years before that. So my point being is as well, we have an interesting work that we do here. This was brought up at our previous meeting of where it's different than most workplaces in many different ways in the work that we do, in the sense that this is at times at committee adversarial as well. Yes, people have remote work options, but the style or just the organization of meetings and the passions that are here are a bit different as well. Could you just talk and elaborate a bit more? I don't know if you are able to break down a little bit between the different types of hybrid meetings where these injuries are reported, the incidents that happen, if it's an injury or a complaint that is made or a issue that's raised, is it from a technical nature? Was it because multiple people were talking? Do you have those broken down about exactly where the complaints emanated from?
Very good question, Mr. President. I'll try to break that down. Absolutely. The one thing you mentioned what happened before the pandemic. I also said in my opening remark that since the past 10 years, we've been measuring that. I played Canadian football, so if you remember the concussion issues, people are a lot more aware now. So it's a similar effect when you get a big loud bang in your ear that could create. So I think the data and the science is getting better and better to understand what happened. Similarly to the concussion, when I was playing, nobody was caring about that. And now I think there's a lot of protocol in place. So the reason why there was no data in the past, maybe just because now there were put under the spotlight under the condition of the pandemic. In terms of the breakdown, I really like the question, Mr. President, because we call them a sound incident. The sound is kind of like the supply chain, but it's a sound chain. So it could be many things. If it's a remote participant like we have today, something can happen in their building. They can lose connectivity, and we can lose sound there. So that might be for us a sound incident that might not cause an injury, or they might not affect the hearing of the interpreter. That being said, they might not be able to interpret if they're not getting the sound. So for us, it's a service and interruption. So we track those. After that, there's I don't know, some of you might have been in meetings in a couple of weeks ago when there was an alert on our phone that was testing the alert system around Canada. So there was a lot of meeting, believe it or not, around Canada. Everybody had their phone, and all of a sudden that big buzz came out. So for an interpreter who were actually actively listening, so it could have created some discomfort, and we have measures for that. The case, as we mentioned, we went from 128 in 2022, 78 last year, and now we have 10. The downside of that is the one that we have left are mostly driven by human behavior, is the fact that you bring the earpiece towards the microphone, and that's what they call the Larsen effect. And Larsen effect is basically a fancy name for feedback, the buzz, and it's that sound could be extremely harmful for the hearing. So that's why even we only have a few now. Those are the one that we would really like to prevent, working with our colleagues. So we have the type, and they could be also, I would say, when the sound is super low, they would work, but they can't hear, so it will probably have an effect on them, not as immediate as a Larsen effect, but we're tracking those as well. So they're under the family of sound-related incidents.
And just cognizant of my time, I think I can get one more in. I appreciate the football. That is a good example of maybe the difference that we have to keep confronting here is when you play a football game, everyone's there on the field. Here, when we're trying to do the work, people are at home, they're in an office, they could be wherever, having or not having an approved headset. My question, or my final point maybe be for you to comment on is, I think from the previous studies, the best and safest way for the work that you do is if we are here in person within the room. That can control from a technological, or what you can control is the best. If you're relying on Zoom or other thing, wherever people are, the internet connection, what devices they're using, or the way they're participating in a meeting, the best way still at the end of the day, the safest way for you is if we are in person as much and as best as possible, correct?
Mr. Limber, in about 20 seconds, please.
Yeah, very quickly, I would say it is correct. We really enjoy when it's in person because we do work out of the cabin, but there could be some incident in an in-person setting as well. I will just highlight that, and this is where the Larsen effect happens. Where online, there's a different type of problem. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Duncan. Madame Fortier, 6 minutes à vous.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much to our witnesses for being with us today and for testifying. But before I begin my questions, I'd like to thank you for your professionalism, for your work that is required every day at a high level of quality and caliber. I have the privilege, of course, of being able to work in both languages, but sometimes I do use the interpretation because it's very important for us to ensure that the information be shared. And I can say that the work is good. So I'd like to come back to this question. We're currently examining the policy of prevention and harassment prevention in the workplace for MPs. And I'd like us to focus on an exercise where we'd like to obtain your ideas, what it is that you would like to see put in place. And I'm wondering if you could describe a scenario, perhaps two scenarios, under which a member's behavior in a committee could harm interpreters. And my second question is whether or not this occurs frequently. That is what I'm trying to understand from you today. Excellent question, Mr. Chair. First of all, I think it's important to specify that we are part of the public administration. We follow the Code of Ethics of the Public Service, and in this code, we also have the Translation Bureau, which belongs to the family of Public Works Canada, and these two codes that were subjected to address workplace harassment and violence prevention, not only with the general public, but with clients, because 90% of the services are delivered to the public, and often we have to deal with both. But today we're focusing on interpretation. we have to say that most interpreters really are invisible. Sometimes things take place behind the glass, and we have met with committee chairs or liaison chairs where we were able to have discussions with them to have a better communication with them to ensure that when something takes place there, that the committee chair is informed and the clerk. An example is this. No doubt you've heard about people who were playing around with their earpieces. They were swinging it around. That isn't necessarily voluntary. It might simply be a tic, or in the middle of a debate and people walk around and it's a bit of a tic, and they also fiddle with their pens. That is something that can absolutely impact the interpreter's work, but it also might be perceived perhaps not as a lack of respect, but a lack of understanding of the perils of the Larson effect. That is why we have the stickers on the tables today. In some cases, we were compelled to interrupt the service, and it has happened online when we had a witness, although they had a good microphone, but there was no sound. Interpreters can't interpret what they can't hear. In that case, we have to suspend the meeting. And then we also hear people say, yes, let's continue, let's go, and sometimes it's a very busy debate, and that has happened. To date, we've been able to have the discussions, and I'd like to turn over to Mr. Ball, since he's also an interpreter. I have another question. Just would you cite an example for us, Mr. Ball? Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, interpreters are aware of the role that they play in the political debate in Canada. We work in an environment that is highly politicized. In addition to political debate, emotions run high. Often people will criticize or be angry if the service is interrupted. But it is something that I feel we manage very well. The interpreters are subjected to a great deal of pressure. But as far as I'm concerned, as being in charge of the service, they know that I'm behind them. I support them if ever they have to interrupt a service. We also have a code of ethics. An interpreter who cannot hear cannot deliver the service and must interrupt the service. We've noted that there has been an increase, at least I've seen this when I came to committees. I was in a committee before I was minister, and now I'm coming back. I see that sometimes there's a certain level of toxicity in the discourse, in the conversations. Would you agree with the fact that there has been an increase? And what is the impact this has on interpreters? How does this enable them or not to do their work? So how can we manage that part? Well, I'll ask Matthew to respond. Mr. Chair, thank you for that question. That's a very interesting question. Truly, I think it would be difficult for me to speak to that, to the sense and that the interpreter is your voice. It places himself in your shoes, and you know that more than I do. Your emotions are part of your statements. They're part of the answers you give, but the interpreter is not you. So the interpreter knows how to step away from you as a role, but is there to represent you and speaks in the first person and says I rather than you or he. But I don't think that this is an issue. Yes, but the interpreter as such doesn't necessarily have the attitude or display the behavior of somebody who's speaking very loudly, will not necessarily do that, will not pick up the emotions of an MP. But I take it that in the way of interpreting the words, they do so, but they don't necessarily repeat the mood or their tone. Yes, Mr. Chair, I think it is a good question. Well, there are two schools of thought. With respect to emotions in interpretation, I would say that there's one that is more European, traditional, where you simply deliver the words in a monotone fashion. You don't pick up the emotions of the speaker. But I think right now many clients appreciate hearing interpretation that is more emotional, which conveys the emotions that underlie the words. In fact, I was also a teacher at the University of Ottawa, and I'd say that interpreting is not words, it's ideas behind the words, it's emotions, etc. So I think that it's good for the interpreter to deliver that emotion behind your statements, but we're not in your emotions, we represent them. So perhaps we could delve into that later if I have an opportunity to revisit the issue of what we do now with the School of Thoughts. Would you have any suggestions for our study? Thank you very much, Mrs. Fortier. Ms. Gaudreau, I would like to give you the floor for 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I would like to salute my colleagues and interpreters and you. It's very rare that I appear in a hybrid fashion, but given what I've heard, I'd really like to focus with our witness on physical health. We've spoken about this few moments. We've spoken about the Larson effect. And we have just spoken about the interpreter's modulation when things become more emotional. As far as I'm concerned, we're currently assessing the policy on the prevention of harassment and violence vis-a-vis members of parliament. So I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of the interpreter, and you'll be able to give me an answer on that. Do they have to interpret everything? That is, the words that are spoken by members of parliament, whatever they are, whether they be disrespectful or deleterious. Thank you very much for the question, Mr. Chair. Let me give you a beginning of an answer, and of course I'll turn it over to Mr. Ball to continue. There's one thing we want to avoid is that interpreters add words that are not spoken. Again, we've mentioned if they can't hear and they can't interpret, they might have heard something they think, but we don't want them to say things they haven't heard. And when the words are spoken, usually, in some cases at least, it's a summary because things go very quickly. They don't have time, they're looking, they're listening at the same time, so sometimes it's a synthesis. But when it comes to specific words, and perhaps I'll ask Mr. Ball, perhaps he would like to add something to that. Have you seen cases that you recall where certain words were omitted? If I may, Mr. Chair. Yes, it's important that the interpreter translate all of the words that have been spoken. As Mr. Limburger just said, it is important not to add words. So there are some important moments during a political discourse. There are non-parliamentary words that are said. The interpreter must render them, because otherwise the people from the other side will not have heard it. The other ones listening in the other language won't have heard them. And recently in the House, we have heard some major decisions taken. So, Mr. Ball, from what I hear, is that there's no policy where there's a restriction on words. That is, the interpreter says it's inaudible for the interpreter. He says that or she says that because they don't want to say the word in the other language. Yes, if the interpreter hears that, they must render it. Well, I'm going to become, let's say I'm an interpreter tomorrow morning and I hear some deleterious, some misogynist wording in the incidents that you've had. How does this play out for interpreters? Because that is collateral damage, and I would like you to be very honest. I'm very concerned. Mr. Chair, I understand the nature of the question. There are a few aspects that I'd like to address. First of all, it's about the intensity of the work. I think recently you saw that our translation volumes for documents, you saw the hours of interpretation, everything is up. And these have to all be done in a quick period of time. And of course, there is a great deal of tension that can be felt during some events, during some meetings. And that's clear. Yeah, I don't have a lot of time. But my question is about mental health. When you must repeat statements that we disagree with and these run against our values, I understand I'm also an actor in life. But when you have to put emotion into it, because you've evolved a great deal on that level, and I appreciate it. But how do interpreters feel? Because here we're trying to develop a policy that essentially we impact all of the work. And what are the interpreters saying to you when things really degenerate, when they become terrible? I think things are not running smoothly right now. I understand your question about mental health. What I could add is this. I think the main impact on the interpreters when it comes to mental health is the concern that they're going to experience more than one acoustic incident. And I think as part of their professionalism, they understand that regardless of what the discussion is, whether it be in a committee or question period, that at the end of the day, they're professionals. But they receive a great deal of support. There are a lot of efforts made to sustain health and safety at the office. I think anything having to do with mental health, it's not whether or not today, is that they're worried that there might be an acoustic incident that will impact their hearing. That's really what I see more in affecting their mental health. You have 60 seconds left. I had a minute, but that's fine. 60 minutes is a minute. Sorry about that. Where I'm trying to get at is for the purpose of our study. I think we would need to get a general picture, an internal survey, explaining to us how interpreters experience their work when they are working in a context that is not respectful, where they might hear vexatious statements. I think for the purpose of our study, I think it would be important for us to understand, to obtain these results and to receive these findings from the interpreters as to how they feel. I'm trying to put myself in their place. I know that they're watching me right now because I'm putting myself in their shoes. And my concern regarding their physical health is that this be a priority. Nevertheless, you come home and you've interpreted, let's say, debates that are disrespectful. I'd like to know more. Would this be possible for you? We at the department, we have services. Very quickly, please. Yes, we do have services that enable us to see whether or not we have gleaned any feedback from our interpreters to that effect. I would also include those doing written translation. It's the same thing for them. And we also have interpreters at the Supreme Court, and there are many cases such as this one. So again, it's a matter of the professionalism of interpreters who are used to working in all kinds of situations. Thank you very much.
Yours for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. I want to continue on that vein. We did hear at the last meeting, the panel, that there are impacts when you're, it's not only interpreting, but when you are part of this institution. And as a former staffer, I was always amazed at how, while I wasn't directly the one in the line of fire per se, there was a great deal of impact. And there's a feeling on the Hill, there's a feeling that gets, excuse the pun, translated down onto others. So I appreciate that there is an attempt to have that separation, that translators do separate themselves, or interpreters do separate themselves, but is there a specific training that comes with that? Is that part of the training in order to become an interpreter?
Monsieur le Président, étant donné que la question ça porte sur la formation.
I would like to turn the question over to Mr. Ball.
Yes, it's part of the interpreter's job to separate themselves from the speech. So as an interpreter, we are all public servants. Our job is to represent your thoughts faithfully and accurately to the listeners in the other language group. And that is part of the training at the university. And yes, interpreters do have to hear sometimes horrific things. Political debate is probably not the worst of things that many interpreters hear. And yes, it's part of the training. Interpreters form a community. They speak to each other afterwards. If there's a particularly difficult meeting, I'm sure, in the booth, I know because I've lived it, they talk amongst themselves and they debrief. And so I would say I'm not overly concerned about their mental health from that perspective. I would agree with my boss, not just because he's my boss, but I think the bigger concerns for them are more around the health and safety stuff. And as Mr. Limburner says, we've made great strides, and I think they're reassured by that. But I think from a mental health standpoint, for us, it's the health and safety that's the greatest. And like I said earlier, most interpreters understand they work in a highly politicized environment, and they are able to separate themselves and what they speak into the microphone from themselves from you. So I'm not overly concerned for that. It's part of the job, and when you become an interpreter, you accept that.
In terms of those supports that you referenced briefly at the end of the last question, in terms of that mental health support, I mean, there certainly is a greater understanding as we move forward, even under the last year or so, of what mental health challenges, impacts are taken on to anybody in any workplace, but specifically this one. So could you go into a bit more detail about how you're ensuring that greater understanding and that evolution of our understanding of mental health, how that's in place for interpreters, and if there's anything that we can do to ensure that it's as within this institution more in line with what is needed?
So, Monsieur le Président, Mr. President, the question is a very good question. So, what we do, as I mentioned in my opening remark, we created a position, a director position for the well-being of interpreters. This is not something that was ever done in the history of the Translation Bureau. So, we've put somebody in place whose only focus is on that, and part of the well-being is definitely the mental health. So, we're carefully. It goes through many types. So, we have numerous discussion. We meet them, we bring them together to get their feedback, and we're making sure that we have plans to improve our services. Maybe I would like to highlight we do 50,000 hours of interpretation every year for the Parliament, which is tremendous. And there's a lot of things that are going well. But again, it's that prediction of any type of incident. What I would say that's causing the most stress right now when you walk into work, if you would walk to work and you don't know if today something's going to happen to you, it creates some anxiety. But it's not the only thing. The relationship with our colleague in the House of Commons and at the Senate is paramount. Doing what we do is a team sport because there's many people that are not even from the same organization that all come together in order to support what we're doing here. But we're paying a lot of attention. I mentioned the ombudsman or the ombud of PSPC, which is amazing services that they can go and talk to. But in addition, because of what happened, and of course that we have also instruction from Labour Canada, it's very serious. So we want to make sure that everybody understands what we're doing, and being transparent and having a discussion is our main tool.
In terms of how members can be better about this, our improvements. I think of certain instances, and it may. I mean, I certainly have seen. I play with a pen. I know some play with their earphones, but there are instances, specific members who purposely scream into their mics in the House of Commons for it's a shtick, it's their effect. What do you do in those instances? How do you deal with that? Is there a protocol? Has that been used in these particular instances?
So, Mr. President, part of our measures that we've put in place, so the sound is controlled behind the window as well. So we're trying to put everything that we can in order to mitigate those situations. Interpreters can also adjust the volume that they need to work with, for sure. So it is maybe Matthew. Do you want to add anything around when they?
Briefly, Mr. Chair, if you will. Our goal is not to hamper your debate. Our goal is not to impede on how members of Parliament work. The instructions, the directions that have been put in place, we understand that they're having an impact on maybe how MPs feel about the service, but really, we've directed interpreters to make sure that they look after their health and safety. So if someone's yelling in the microphone, obviously they need to turn the volume down. We understand that at the end of the day, probably MPs believe it's more important to have healthy interpreters that can continue to support them and it can make sure that the capacity is there rather than maybe missing a word because the volume was turned down. So we're there to support them and to make sure they work as safely as possible.
Okay, thank you, Madame Matheson. Monsieur Berthold, vous avez 5 minutes.
Mr. Berthold, 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. In 5 minutes. That's not a great deal of time. First of all, so I would wish to congratulate you for the 90th anniversary, also for the mandatory translation of debates. I think that's very important, especially for Quebecers such as myself. The 89% of the time is spent in I speak French most of that time in the House and in committees, so I want my colleagues to understand what I'm saying. I was very pleased to learn about this new way of seeing interpretation and to ensure that interpreters are also able to convey emotion. I've had the opportunity of being at international meetings and to listen to the European-style interpretation, and I can say that when you include excerpts from our debates, these are much more interesting. It's much more interesting when you hear some emotion. I'm not saying that it has to be extreme, but that you hear the interpreters including emotion. They're doing a great job. I'd like to thank them for that. I also used to be an MP who used to speak very, very quickly, and I think that I've substantially reduced the pace of my speech by understanding the work of the interpreters. Because specifically, I've had an opportunity of speaking with some of them at times, and I understand that from 135 words a minute, I've really reduced the rhythm, and I think that was greatly appreciated by all. So allow me to say that you're doing an excellent job. So how many complaints have you received regarding interpretation from MPs? I don't know. I'd say over the last 5 years. Mr. Chair, thank you very much for those comments and also what you said about the Translation Bureau. Since I've come into office, the emphasis was greatly placed on acoustic incidents. But as well, we've also had many discussions to speak either about preferences or certain comments, and there are very few, I'd say. I've had comments from people who really appreciate these new earpieces and people who don't like it at all. So it's quite difficult to balance. So I know that we can't speak at the same time. I'll let you finish. Well, what I'd like to say is this. Have you received any official complaints regarding the work of interpreters by MPs? We've had some official complaints about the translation of documents where there are mistakes. Now, regarding the interpretation, and again, that's where I'll turn it over to Mr. Ball. Perhaps he could cite some examples. Sometimes it's the tone of voice. Some interpreters might be speaking more loudly than another. I hear that often, but it's similar to that. It's nothing major. I think that we're one of the best in the world, and our exam is very difficult to pass. But again, it's a matter of preference, and it's like audiobooks. Some people like it, others find it boring. Also, it really depends on each person's preference. And sometimes it's tough, and that's what I'm trying to explain, is that we're trying to have a conversation, and we're not trying to speak one over the other. But I'm trying to lead you somewhere. I don't want to interrupt you, but sometimes we have no other choice. And that's one of the issues that we're also seeing as an MP when we're working with a witness, and the witness is in front of us, and the witness takes a bit of time, and that isn't what you've done, but that really illustrates what the conversation can be. I really want us to speak about that relationship. So there were no complaints about harassment or anything of that nature by MPs regarding the interpreters. Now, first of all, have the interpreters submitted any complaints regarding MPs without naming any names, without establishing any links here, but have there been complaints about harassment or subjects surrounding harassment? To my knowledge, Mr. Chair, there have not been any official complaints, but as I've indicated, we also have the Code of Ethics, really fosters official, formal dispute resolution when there's a perception that one has not been heard. And you'll often see people are in the car, and an interpreter said, I can't hear the witness, and people in the room say, but I do hear them. And in that sense, they sometimes feel that their judgment has not been respected. But in terms of an official complaint, I don't think so. But Annie, do you have anything to say about that? In fact, no, I'm not familiar with any official complaints having been submitted. The interpretation work is not easy, as we just heard from Mr. Limburner. Interpreters must call constantly on their own judgment to see whether or not they can interpret or not. And I can reassure you that all interpreters come to work with the wish to interpret. It's never wonderful for an interpreter to have to cut somebody off and say, look, I cannot interpret you because I can't hear you. They don't do this because they enjoy doing it. I can guarantee that, but in terms of official complaints, I'm not aware of any. Mr. Berthold, unfortunately, your 5 minutes are up. Those are all the time you have. Yes. Yes, one more. I'd like to say thank you. Thank you very much for your work. And I worked for a long time in the sound industry as a DJ, as a radio host in the evening. I've always worked in a sound environment, so I understand that it's so important to have good equipment, and especially when it comes these little earpieces, it's very tight when you are wearing glasses. I'd just like to point that out.
À vous pour 5 minutes.
Ms. Romanato, 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Puis, je veux remercier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank our witnesses for being here this morning.
Thank you to the interpreters for doing what they do. And rest assured, when I was a chair of a committee, that if there was a sound issue, we stopped the committee. The committee did not go forward if we couldn't secure the sound for the interpreters to ensure the work that they do. I want to follow up a little bit on some of what my colleague MP Matheson was talking about. In this place, interpreters spend their day being our voice. And some MPs, and it happens, whether it be in the House or in committee, will get very passionate about what they're talking about. Some will scream in the mic. Some will argue amongst each other. And so you have the words that are being interpreted that are sometimes not the most pleasant, whether it be the sound quality, very loud, or fighting amongst each other. But there's also sometimes the subject matter. I've sat on the Veteran Affairs Committee where we would hear horrifying testimony. Some of the studies that we undertake, status of women, hearing horrific testimony that the interpreters, and they are very professional, please don't think that, but at the end of the day, they're going home and they're having to replay that, what they heard and what they had to say. And I think that's where we're trying to go, is to say the words that we are using, whether it be in tone, in sound, and the actual words, some of the things that they are hearing has to have an impact on them. I mean, I can get up and walk out of debate in the House if it's getting a little testy for me. They can't. So I think that's where we're going with this, is to understand how what we're using, the words we're using and how we use them, how is that impacting them? And have you had any complaints or people saying, look, I can't do that committee anymore. It's too heavy for me. Has that ever happened?
So, Mr. President, it hasn't happened since I joined the Translation Bureau, but what I would like to maybe elaborate, today there's 3 people in the booth, or 2 people, so they are also replacing one another in the course of a conversation, and sometimes they would focus on something else, so maybe they won't have the entire view. I mean, just from an energy perspective, when you get into a room and there's something heavy, I mean, everybody's affected, of course, we can understand that, but as part of their the mental health, I mean, we spend so much focus on their well-being that there's possibility for them to voice those concerns. It's not something that we take lightly. Of course, recently the emphasis seems to be on the physical, but I don't think we never let down the impact on their mental health. The scheduling is extremely tight as well. Some of your committees are going overtime, over midnight, so they're extremely well trained around that type of very intense short period of time that we're into, and then after that they have other measures over the summer to kind of get ready. So maybe I'll ask Matthew on that part of the screaming, because again, that's something that we have limiters for sounds behind the scene, so that will cut off if a sound is going too high. Maybe you want to elaborate on that.
If I may, Mr. Chair, it's a very interesting question, and it is something we are aware of. It is a phenomenon known as secondary or vicarious trauma, and interpreters do experience it. We have the Chief Interpreter for Canada behind us here, and she's part of a network of worldwide heads of interpreting services, and this is something that's discussed at these tables, so it is something we're certainly aware of. But I'd just like to reassure the committee members that in terms of Parliament, interpreters who work for Parliament understand the cut and thrust of the debate. They understand that it's, I would say even members themselves probably understand that sometimes, you put it on a little, it's a little dramatic, it's a show, and sometimes it's very authentic and genuine, and that's part of the job. And I think that all of our staff and all of our freelance interpreters understand this very well. I'm not overly concerned about vicarious or secondary trauma. Like Mr. Limburner said, the bigger concern for me is that they feel safe and that they feel that it's a healthy work environment. And also Mr. Limburner alluded to this, it's a team sport. So I've been in the booth when I've had to interpret stuff that's emotional, and sometimes you just have to take a break, and so there's 3 people in the booth to support you.
So I'm out of time, but I wanted to thank you for that. And we will, as you've trained us or taught us about the importance of good sound hygiene, and we want to also keep in mind that the words that we're using can also hurt, in a sense, not just the person receiving it, but the person actually having to translate it. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Romanato. Madame Gaudreau, malheureusement, c'est seulement 2 minutes 30 secondes pour vous, mais la parole est à vous.
Mrs. Gaudreau, you have very limited time. Oh, there was a little bit of a lag, so I do know it is my turn. Once again, congratulations for the interpretation, because right now I didn't hear the chair's words. So I inferred that it was my turn. How many people have left the Interpretation Bureau over the last decade? Well, let me give you a sense of the volume. We have about 70 interpreters who are staff interpreters who support the 50,000 hours of interpretation I mentioned. We also hire freelance interpreters. It's about 100 interpreters. It's a very limited pool, not only in Canada but worldwide. There are retirements. Have some people taken early retirement because of the conditions that were in place the last few years? That's possible. But in terms of actually having resigned, I will turn it over to Mr. Ball to speak to that. Mr. Chair, thank you for that question. Now, resignations, there haven't been any. We have a pool of about 60 staff interpreters who do other things. Some are asked to do translation for some periods for a number of reasons. It's hard for me to say. Well, that is what I would like to know. What are the reasons? Some people go into translation for certain times of their lives. Perhaps they have they're new parents, or perhaps they'd like to work a more regular schedule. I don't have the exact figures, but some people move on to other duties and they come back to interpretation later. Perhaps we could find some numbers. Well, essentially what I'm trying to understand as part of the trauma, the interpretation, the briefings, etc., I'm trying to, what is it that you don't hear because you don't work closely to them? I want to hear from them. But when they finish their jobs, what kind of topics do they speak about? Do they talk about what they'll be doing the weekends, or the statements that they've had to, the speeches that they've had to interpret? Well, if I may, it really depends. It depends on the individuals. It depends on the group. Sometimes people will be speaking about the meeting that has just ended, but I take it that most of the time they'll be speaking about the weekend or about their children or about their plans for tonight. Those are my questions, Mr. Chair.
Oui, rapidement.
Oui, rapidement.
Well, there are other reasons. There are working conditions. Again, a reminder that throughout the pandemic, the interpreters always came to work here. Now they receive offers for people to work remotely. There are many different reasons why they do this. These are very difficult conditions. They work long hours. They work on site. But I think they're passionate and in their work, and they're proud of their work. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
2.5 minutes to you.
So again, you've spoken a lot about the new policies that are in place, the new rules, the spacing out of members, placement of earpieces. It's all very, very important. These are important changes for your workplace, but within an institution that we heard at the last committee meeting, that, steeped in tradition, may be resistant to change, and maybe used like barriers could be seen, or that resistance through parliamentary privilege or things like that. So how can we in this committee take lessons that you've learned in terms of applying those rules, creating that change that you need, so that we can also create a healthier, safer, more functional workplace?
I'll be quick, but Mr. President, so many measures that are to respond to the instruction that we got were very technical, as you mentioned. Some of those were put in place all at the same time. So I just want to reassure everyone that we're working with our colleague to see if there's some measures that we could that we could adjust. Just a couple of weeks ago, the opening statement by the president of every committee was very long. Now it's a little bit shorter. We feel that people understand the distanciation, but again, if there's some possibility to use new technology to limit the impact on you, because we understand that it could create some frustration. I would go back when everybody speak at the same time. That's probably the one that I hear the most. That is very difficult because there's a lot of voice coming in, and to really do a good work. That's one piece that I hear a lot. So that's one. And again, if there's a service interruption, maybe just to make sure that everybody understand, there's ways for people to get the information quickly. Sometimes it's coming behind the window. Other time it is coming from the sound system. But just maybe to respect the fact that everybody wants to get going with the procedure and be respectful on that sense. I would say that. The last one is for those online. We're able to send headset around the world in a very short time, and it's those headset are being approved. They're ISO headset. It's in some very remote area of the world sometime, and we're being very good, and we can conduct tests ahead of time for your witness so they can use better headset for our own work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Monsieur Berthold, 5 minutes.
Mr. Berthold, for 5 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I would like to take that last 5 minutes because I hadn't quite finished. 2 points. If I understood your comments following all of the questions, is that the interpreters, essentially, they don't want to take part in the debate, nor do they want to change the debate or the tenor of the discussion. What they seek to do is to render the debate exactly as to those listening to them. Yes, and in very quick timeline. An interpreter comes in 4 or 5 seconds after. It's very difficult to do this. Not only do you have to, as Mr. Ball mentioned, respect the emotions of the meeting. That is the Canadian version of interpretation. It's very good, but you have to be very quick to execute in real time. So the pride of interpreters, because I was told this at the beginning when I came in, I was not familiar with this, and I understood that these are not translators, they're interpreters. And this is one of the first interactions I had with interpreters, well, because I had spoken about translate, and I was told, Mr. Berthold, we don't do translation. What we do is interpretation, so that people understand. It's because the words aren't the same in the other language, and emotion as well might be the same. So I find that extremely interesting. So, Ms. Trépanier, when we're elected for the first time as an MP, we receive training as well. Are you considering providing a new training session to MPs about interpretation and how this works? Is that something that could be considered? I think that would be desirable because I worked as I went along. When I was elected as an MP, I learned how to work with interpreters. Do you think that this is something that this committee might recommend? Well, I'll turn it over to Mrs. Trépanier, but we have taken part in a number of training sessions with our colleagues from the Privy Council when it came to a change in government or what happens when other ministers come in. So no doubt this would concern our colleagues in House here. I think it would be good perhaps to have a sheet to explain the basic concepts. But Ms. Trépanier, thank you very much for the question, Mr. Chair. And I think that, in fact, that is an excellent idea. I think, no doubt, as my CEO has indicated, there are documents that exist, but having a training session would be very relevant. I thank you for the suggestion. And that would be a practical training with the interpreters to see what kind of work they do and to experience what happens in their box where they are. Because it is when you're living it and when you're interested in people who do the work that we're able to better understand it, to do our work better, all the while respecting the work of the interpreters. Thank you very much. We've also posted some online videos to familiarize people with what takes place on the other side of the glass and about the very specialized work done by interpreters, and we're going to continue with that. Now, from a technical standpoint, as I mentioned earlier, I have a bit of experience with respect to sound because I worked in the field. There are sound limitators that limit the extreme sound spikes. And I've seen places here where you cannot open more than microphone anywhere. I've seen that elsewhere, but that's not the case here. Everybody has their own microphone. Is that something that you're considering from a technical standpoint? What is the Translation Bureau's plan for the next few months and years? Mr. Chair, I'm not an interpreter. I'm an industrial engineer, and I have studied in the field as well. That we're looking at a number of technical measures. You've mentioned the earpieces. It's possible that when somebody takes the earpiece immediately, it might cause a problem in sound. But there's also the digital sound. We have less of a Larsen effect when it's digital sound. So people joining us on Zoom today, that really reduces the danger. The danger is when we're in an acoustic environment that is more analog in nature. So that is another area that we are verifying. You might as well have been in concerts where the singers have earpieces, but that is it's inside their ear. That's truly a difference, and this is why the Larsen effect is greatly reduced. Here we want the earpieces to be used by a number of people. That's required, so perhaps we would develop specific earpieces for you, and you could use them. But we are working with colleagues. We're not responsible for the audiovisual component. We have actual beings, human beings, interpreters who come in the room with us. We also work with the teams to identify the technical tools that might completely eliminate the Larsen effect. We're studying these because we want to eliminate any interruptions for you, of course. There are only a few seconds left. Yes, but you've been successful in doing an excellent job because moving from 128 to 10 in only 3 years, well, I commend you for that. Hats off. It's a matter of human behavior. We work in that, and it's always the last mile that's the toughest. That's where we are.
Monsieur Berthaud, je pense au début du réunion.
And Mr. Berthaud, I think at the beginning of the meeting, I also mentioned translation. I'd like to correct that and use the word of interpretation. Thank you.
Over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'll be brief because I know we have very limited time. Just two things. Mr. Ball, I know that you mentioned that there's not a lot of injuries or complaints with respect to vicarious or secondary trauma. I'm not sure if you've had a chance to maybe survey the interpreters to see if that is something that is a problem, and I would suggest maybe you do, because I would anticipate that there are maybe some people who are having to deal with that. And the other thing I would say, we didn't talk about, but I have seen in debate, especially in committee, MPs that slam their hand down or are banging on the desk to make a point. I anticipate that also can injure. Is that correct?
So maybe I'll just, Mr. President, I'll pick the last one, loud bang, which is not a Larsen effect, could definitely have an impact on interpreters. It could be a laptop dropping down, a microphone dropping down, or somebody banging on the table. Absolutely. In terms of the vicarious effect, maybe, Matthew?
Sure, thank you for the question. We work really closely with the union. There's a professional association representing the freelance interpreters. I would say the Bureau management is very open and constantly working with them to ensure that issues are addressed as they come up. And to echo my boss's sentiments from earlier, the biggest issue facing the staff and freelance interpreters right now, it's the matter of the health and safety and the sound quality. And so we're working really closely on that. But absolutely, we're always open. We've actually done a workplace evaluation recently, so we'll be getting the results from that as well. So if there's vicarious trauma issues, it will come up in that report, which we're expecting soon. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I greatly appreciate it. Merci.
Thank you, Ms. Romanato. Colleagues, we are going to suspend briefly in order to set up for the next panel. Typically, we've been inserting some health breaks into our meetings in order to allow for people to move around a little bit, catch their breath. So I'm going to give us a generous couple of minutes here in order to turn over, because we do still have a couple of more hours to go this morning. One thing, colleagues, that I did want to raise that could be helpful, and I know it might be a little bit difficult to adjust to, but in order to assist in all of us knowing how much time is remaining in our speaking order, and I note that Madame Gaudreau did this earlier, it is helpful to have you time yourself and to have that clock in front of you. That accomplishes two things. One, there's no discrepancy between the clock with the chair and members, but also it means that I don't have to interrupt and perhaps allows for a more seamless meeting. So I make that recommendation. I know it might take a little bit of time for us to implement, but I think it could be helpful. With that, Mr. Ball, Mr. Limburner, Madame Trépanier, merci beaucoup d'être ici avec nous ce matin.
Thank you very much for having been with us today.
For a few minutes, and we'll be back for our second panel. Colleagues, in our second panel, we are welcoming two members of Parliament, our colleagues Ikra Khalid and Pam Damoff, who are going to be sharing some testimony. I do want to start by offering a little bit of a trigger warning. I understand that we'll be discussing some things that are related to abuses that have either been experienced directly by people around this table or by extension. And I know that for those watching, some of the language or the retelling of stories may be disconcerting and triggering. So for colleagues around the table, for staff in the room, if there is any assistance that is required, you are most certainly at any point welcome to see myself or the clerk if we can be of help. I know that there will be a number of difficult topics that are raised, not only by our colleagues across the way, but by other members around the table as well. So I just, as a courtesy, wanted to offer that before we begin. Ms. Rempel-Garner, I see you out of the corner of my eye, so I'll turn to you momentarily.
Chair, sometimes when there is testimony that has become in front of committee that might have trauma sensitivities, there is the option for witnesses to go in camera. I understand that they might not want to, but I would just put that on the table as well, too.
I appreciate that, and I do hope that should we get to a point where witnesses do feel that we need to move in camera, that there won't be any disagreement on the part of committee members to seek the unanimous consent we would need in order for that to happen. So thank you, Ms. Rempel-Garner, for sharing that. Ms. Khalid, I am going to turn to you. Oh, sorry, Ms. Damoff, I'm going to turn to you to begin with your opening statement. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the invitation to appear today. And I'm going to apologize in advance if I get emotional. I'm deeply troubled by the serious implications that increasing harassment and threats have for the safety of MPs and our staff, for the ability of MPs to fulfill our roles, and ultimately for the integrity of Parliament and the long-term sustainability of our democracy. While I worked for over 25 years in real estate investment banking, which was a male-dominated industry, and certainly experienced some misogyny and harassment in my previous career, it doesn't come anywhere close to what I've experienced as an MP. The level of threats and misogyny I'm subject to both online and in person are such that I often fear going out in public, and that is not a sustainable or a healthy way to live. I've been verbally assaulted in the grocery store in my community with a man yelling, "F Trudeau, F you, you're going to jail for what you've done." And at a Burlington business event, when a man aggressively said to me, watch my back, and that I was going to get what was coming to me as he pointed his finger in my face. The toxic drive for social media likes and clips among elected officials has hindered constructive conversations, exasperated differences between us, and diminished our capacity to show empathy towards each other. In emails, calls, and on social media, one of the clearest examples of this degradation of political discourse is the increasing use of a four-letter derogatory term starting with C that I am not comfortable repeating here in Parliament. But you know, in all of my life prior to becoming an MP, both personally and professionally, I have never been called this word before. But during my time as an MP, it has become completely normalized among the public to use this word to label and degrade me and my fellow women MPs. Today, I want to share with the committee and with Parliament and with Canadian excerpts of communications I personally received during my time as an MP through email, by phone, and on social media. And I also want you to think of my incredible staff who are being subjected to this abuse on the phone and reading what people say. This has real negative consequences for their mental health and for the ability of MPs to continue to hire and retain staff. And I want to be clear that while I'm going to use specific examples of the actions of some Conservative MPs, I do not want to suggest in any way that this reflects all Conservative MPs. In fact, this pin I am wearing today was a gift from a Conservative MP, and I have friends across the aisle. I think it bears mentioning that there are many, many more examples than I have chosen to share with you today, but because the words used are far below the dignity of Parliament, I'm not going to repeat them here. Some examples include, and I'm going to quote, "I really don't know how you sleazy liberal C words live with yourselves. Good luck in the next election, you piece of shit. I'm coming after you. That was it. You're done. How are you in government? You deserve a pig shed, you effing piece of shit. We are watching your every move. Nowhere is safe for you. God will make sure you are exposed on Judgment Day. Judgment is here. The hellfire God has waiting for you will burn you." End quotes. Even following my announcement on May 1st that I would not be reoffering, precisely because of the harassment, misogyny, abuse, and explicit threats of violence I received, dozens of hate-filled messages flooded in. For example, and again I'm quoting, "Resign now, you stupid effing cow. Don't wait. Run and hide, libtard effing bitch. Good riddance, C-word. Politics, as you call it, is toxic because your party and government is a corrupt, disgusting sack of shit. If you, C-words, had governed like human beings, the country would not hate your corrupt, fascist C-words. Do better, you stupid C-word." And then lastly, "You're a sad excuse of an MP and worse excuse of a Canadian. May your life be filled with stress and anxiety. May you never know peace in your wretched days. May you live and die alone in a dark, cold place. Burn in hell, C-word." The tone and tenor of public discourse has deteriorated so significantly and to such a degree that I fear the loss of trust in public institutions we're seeing, driven by misinformation and lies being spread by politicians on social media, and the outcomes. I worry about the outcome of this for our democracy. Members of Parliament must understand that they drive and exasperate harassment, abuse, and threats received by other MPs when they spread misinformation and lies and make personal attacks against other members. This has been my case and the case of many of my colleagues. One example was in 2018 when Conservative MP Rachel Thomas used her House of Commons budget, which was taxpayer dollars, to send a mailer to every household in my